If you missed day one recap, I will drop that in the chat right now. It'll also be in the description so you could get caught up with everything we're doing. Day one, we saw some Druze towns, met some religious Jews. We went to, well, just watch the recap.
Nazareth,
we went to Nazareth. We went to an eco village, which we get into in more depth in the first video. So what did we do on day two? How did our day start? We went
to
the Lebanese border.
Rajar.
Exactly. This honestly is one of the most amazing parts of the trip for me so far. We discovered that there's a little town on the Lebanese border called Rajar, and half of it is in Lebanon and the other half is in Israel. But supposedly since 2020, there's been free access for Israelis to go to all parts of the town. And I had never heard of this, so I was surprised. We get there. It's this small little town, very quiet. We didn't really see anybody. Finally, we saw a man walking on the street. He seemed to be a tour guide of some sort. And we started talking to him. He spoke good English. We asked him, are you Lebanese? Are you Israeli? How do you identify? I said, no, I'm Israeli. I've lived here my whole life. Seemed very proud in his Israeli identity. And then
we were like, what's going on here? We have to investigate more.
Right, exactly.
Like, is this really the case for everyone here?
And then we went into a local restaurant. Now, they didn't feel so comfortable being filmed, but we still chatted with them a little bit. And they didn't speak all too much Hebrew, first off. But we did get some information out of them. So I asked them if they consider themselves to be Lebanese or Israeli. They said, neither. We're Syrian. So not just Syrian, there's Syrian Alwaites, which is the minority group of which Assad was. So there's literally a Syrian Alawite community living in Israel, and I had never known that. It's fascinating.
In a town that's on the border, that exists within the border of both Lebanon and Israel.
Yeah.
There's a community of Syrians.
Exactly. Adam, anything you want to add about that experience?
Yeah, well, first, shout out to my cousin who served. We told him we're going to go to Majd al-Shams, and we told him we want to see how close we can get to Lebanon, right? And he said, oh yeah, I used to do patrols there. I can tell you how to get in. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, go to this town, Rajar, and you could already actually technically be in Lebanon. I was like, I don't believe this. There must be some loophole, or there's no way. And he's like, no, just go. In fact, it's one of the soft kind of links, soft chain and the link in the Israeli security apparatus around Lebanon. That technically speaking, it is already in Lebanon, but it's almost like the Israeli army had like occupied it, but it's still technically Lebanon. But not according to that tour guide, right? When we asked that tour guide, where are we? Are we here? Are we in Israel? He's like, of course we're in Israel. I said, yes, but if you look in Google Maps, we're not in Israel. And he says, yeah, they just need to update it, which I think is like code word. Like it should be ours, but they need to update it. So everybody else is wrong, we're right. Now, for this guy, he wouldn't want it to be Lebanon. And for many of the other folks, as Adar said, they wouldn't want it to be technically Lebanon because they still see themselves as Syrians. So the way that it worked is Israel occupied it. I think that was in 67, they occupied it. And then, but the maps that the Israeli generals were using were from like British time, and they were wrong. And they thought it belonged to the Lebanese. But there wasn't technically a confrontation between the Lebanese and the Israelis. And so the Lebanese themselves didn't want to take it back, because then it would look like they are taking Syrian territory. But it was technically Syria. But the Israelis thought it was Lebanon. So anyway, that's what, now these people are Syrian Alwaites, but it is technically Lebanon. The Lebanese say that the town had expanded into Lebanon, even though initially it was Syria, but now they're laying claim on it being Lebanon, at least the northern part of that town. And to get to that northern part, you just drive through. We didn't even see any, right, guys?
Yeah,
there wasn't any border, nothing.
No checkpoint. There's just no way to exit the town from its most northern point. As far as we
there's
could
like
tell.
a little
Yeah.
river, and we saw a UN. Yeah, and I think we took a picture of like a little. What is going?
Balloon!
This
Happy
ceremony.
birthday!
Happy
Do you guys know Adam had a birthday
Happy
this
birthday.
week? I guess Discord knows.
Yes, but it's more likely to be Israel's. It's Israel's birthday today.
Oh yeah.
So
True.
that's probably
not yet, but yeah.
Soon
So
tonight. So anyway, that was wild, and we saw an older Israeli couple that was touring there, and they said, yeah, like as soon as they dropped the barriers to get into the town was just flooded by Israelis from like mainland Israel, but not anymore really at this point. Since the war, it's just kind of like reduced to a trickle. But wild, absolutely wild that that place exists, and that we've never heard of it.
Oh yeah,
like
and the place is so beautiful. It's so peaceful. It was so quiet. Syrian architecture, beautiful flowers everywhere, beautiful overlook at a small river, beautiful clear river. It's just a very nice place to hang out, and a fountain and a pleasant cafe.
And a peace garden.
Yeah, which we didn't actually get to see.
Didn't get to go.
We were too excited to explore and talk to more people.
So then from there, so that's Rajar, and then from there we headed to Masada, no?
Yep, Masada.
So you want to start with that? What that story was?
Sure. Feel free to keep going.
So you might have heard about the rocket attack on Majd al-Shams. This was when like July of last year, where the 12 children got killed, right, in the Druze town of Majd al-Shams. So we were connected with one of the paramedics who was like sent to the station, to the soccer field, and as soon as he got there, he noticed that his daughter had just died. And he was still in duty, and he just, instead of taking his time, he just went and started taking care of all the other children, and just continued working. So he was at the ambulance station in Masada, and we wanted to go and do an interview with him. And so he welcomed us in. He was a very nice man. It was the day before his daughter's birthday also. He welcomed us in, and we started the interview. Right, and then at some point they got this like message, an alarm, and there was an accident, and they had to go and just got in the ambulance and just rushed out.
Yeah, so they were talking casually, and then right as we mic'd him up, that's when the call came. It was very funny timing, actually.
And this was the day before what would have been her 12th or 13th birthday. So it was interesting and sad timing.
Yeah, and even though we didn't get to talk to him, the sheer fact that he went there and realized that learned for the first time that his daughter had been killed in the strike, and then he proceeded to work and do his duty immediately onwards, it just shows how respectable of a person he is.
Yeah. And
Adar, you noticed the photo in the ambulance station that struck you as interesting. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, they describe. Yeah, it was a.
I'm trying to pull it up. I think we took a picture of it.
Yeah, there was it was a photo of everyone who was killed, and it was written in English, and they described it as something like a massacre, who were killed in the massacre, which I just found interesting language, because when you think massacre, you don't think like rocket falling. So it's interesting that I don't know if like just in Arabic, the way it's described, that's how it translates, but it almost doesn't seem like the right language in English. It's probably just a semantic difference, but I did find that to be interesting. And then from there, we then headed over to Majd al-Shams, where the actual rocket fell and killed those 12. And we met with a man by the name of Joseph. And he was a fascinating guy.
An outlier.
Well, we don't even know, right?
Yeah, we're speculating.
We don't know yet because we didn't get to speak to enough people from Majd al-Shams. But
not an outlier of Majd al-Shams, but just an outlier of a person in terms of the beliefs that he and the worldview that he holds.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah. We're like, we asked, are you like, so do you consider yourself? So there's a difference between the Druze community in the Galilee, who have been Israeli citizens. Well, I don't know when they got their citizenship, but they've been part of Israel proper since 1948. And then the Druze in the Golan only in 67. And most of them don't have they don't hold an Israeli ID card. Part of the reason why they don't is because it's the status of the Golan Heights is still unclear. And they don't want to, they believe their life will be at risk if they have an Israeli ID card and then it's given back to Syria. That's one of the rationales. The others, they just don't feel like they're part of Israel. So he explained, though, that the younger generation is becoming more and more Israeli. So then we asked him, do you consider yourself Israeli or Syrian? He says, neither. I'm like, so you're just Druze? He's like, not even. I'm from Majd al-Shams, which I found fascinating. So that's not the sentiment you're going to get in virtually all Druze communities, where they have a very strong identification with their Druze identity. And he didn't seem to have that. And he did make it seem like this is not all too uncommon in Majd al-Shams. He also explained how there's many bars there and there's a nightlife scene, which again, this is, if you look at most Druze communities, this isn't what you're going to find. So it's almost like the Tel Aviv of the Druze community. He spoke about the art scene there. Yeah, it was fascinating. Would you guys like to add anything?
Well, somebody.
Yeah, we asked. No, please, Bianca.
Someone in the chat. Well, this is at the end of the conversation, but someone in the chat wanted us to ask him whether he considered himself an anarchist, whether he believes in countries or not. And I think my biggest takeaway from that conversation was the consistency of his worldview, from his own personal identity as a person, just a person from Majd al-Shams, to his belief towards how to organize the world itself, not believing in countries, and then his view of religion as well, where he doesn't think that any religion is wrong, that there's one's relationship with God, either regardless of what religion you are, you have a relationship with God, or you think, oh, it's me and the universe, that's something that's become more popular to say, like the universe indicates XYZ, or the universe is telling me that I should or should not do that, or any form. So it just felt like he had such a consistent worldview on all of these different layers.
I thought that the role of religion in his mind was larger than I imagined it would be. And he kept saying, like, we don't have that Jerusalem, right? Something like that. What was the phrase he kept using? You remember that? It's like, we don't care about Jerusalem in the same way. So it's, they have their Jerusalem, so they're fighting, but we don't have it, so we don't fight. That was kind of like his take. Well, remember the previous day we met the Druze who were telling us that, we asked them, like, do you feel like you're equal? Do you feel like there's discrimination? Like, what would you improve? And they kept saying that it's very difficult for them to get permits for building and for construction, which is something that we have consistently heard from Palestinian citizens of Israel too, right? I think folks on this call here have mentioned this many, many times. The limitation and constraints posed by the Israeli like land and permit issuance services. And then we heard the same thing from the Druze. But this guy that we met, this Joseph man, he was an architect. So we thought it might be a good idea to just ask him to zoom in to what the process is actually like. What are the challenges? And the challenge that he articulated, Biara Adar, tell me if you think I misheard this, because I'm still a bit skeptical that I understood this right, is that the challenge hasn't been that the state isn't giving the permits. It's that the state made the permit giving contingent on local community acceptance of the issuance of the permits. And it's been very difficult to get his community to agree to, let's say, clear up an old house and to build a building on top. It isn't that the government isn't allowing it. It's that the government is saying it's up to your community to choose, and the community says no.
Because they give like
no
they give very specific guidelines because they view Majd al-Shams as a city rather than a town, and so they're giving very specific requirements for the width of the house, and it's not wide enough for it to be an actual house. It's more like an apartment complex that you can build on top of, and so the community is not accepting those standards. It's not actually with the difficulty of getting the permit itself. It's with the requirements that the permit allows for building.
Yeah. Not sure if anybody's had experience with this type of thing on this call, but I thought that was fascinating. What else did he say? Anyway, there's a very long conversation, and we're gonna upload much of it. Right, Adar, we're going to do some post production and then upload it. But the folks who were on
all of this will be released. Yep. And then from there we went to the soccer field where the rocket hit, and there was such an interesting contrast because they actually didn't fix the fence. There were scooters that were hit and exploded, and they left it all there. Like the crash site was all still there, but then there were kids playing soccer as the sun was setting, and it was kind of like this life goes on moment despite tragedy. That's what it felt like to me. And there was something both tragic and beautiful about it. And then I very embarrassingly, the ball came my way as I was live streaming, and I tried to kick it back to the kids, and it flew up and fell right into the memorial, and rough to say the least. So I ran away. No, I apologized, and no one was upset. I imagine it happens having a memorial in a soccer.
I was gonna say, it probably wasn't a big deal at all. Like,
no,
the kids didn't react at all.
No, not the first time, but still, as we say in Hebrew, lo naim, not comfortable. But yeah, I found that to be very meaningful. How was your guys' experience there?
Adam, you want to go first?
Real quick, I do see a comment here on YouTube that I want to talk about real quick. So Gilad F, thanks for tuning in, says the fact that the requirements for permits are difficult doesn't specifically mean they're discriminatory unless there are different types of requirements for Arab Jewish villages. I think that, first of all, I think there's a pretty strong case to be made that it is discriminatory. The way that building permits are given.
You made another comment. Maybe we should read that first.
So he continues and says, maybe the requirements themselves are too complicated, but it doesn't mean it's discrimination. Over bureaucracy is a problem everywhere, and everyone suffers from it. Yeah, so I would actually agree. Israelis know that bureaucracy here does not function nearly as well as it should. But when you look at like the rate at which Jewish towns get their permits compared to Arab and Druze towns, it's just orders of magnitude different. And also if you look at how these decisions are made, there's a board who decides who gives permits, and some of the members of the board come from the cabinet, the current coalition, and then there's permanent members who are from the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, which pretty much were born out of a policy to buying and providing or selling land specifically to Jews. So there's definitely a systemic discrimination involved in building permits. So yeah.
Adar,
yeah.
Can I have experience with the building permit situation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Feel free to and then we'll get back to the tour update. Yeah.
The issues with the permits and why it's a problem is that building permits for example, in Jerusalem, Palestinians make up about 40% of the municipality, but I think it's something like 8% of the new permits go to them. So in addition to it's very tough. Like we waited 10 years to get our permit. And meanwhile, the Jewish neighborhood, Pisgat Ze'ev, which you guys were driving through yesterday, literally 10, 15,000 homes were built. So Palestinian permits, and even this is in the 48 areas, the Galilee, and I believe it includes the Druze. It includes permits for existing neighborhoods, and they're usually privately done. So if a person wants to build their house or has a plot of land and wants to build on it, but Jewish permits are given to new neighborhoods. So since 1948, we really haven't seen new Jewish neighborhoods. In North Jerusalem right now, near where you guys were driving, there's the largest housing project is being built since 1967, and it's 340 units. That's the largest since 1967. So it's not the fact that they're just discriminatory, but the projects. If when you guys drove through Pisgat Ze'ev, if you would have driven that same road 20 years ago, more than half those homes would not have been there. That place was empty. So you're seeing huge new neighborhoods being built for Jews, but Palestinians struggling to get permits, and these are privately funding. These are not like city projects to build new neighborhoods and streets. So it's on many dimensions, the discrimination.
Thanks for that added context, Justin. Cool. One more comment, and then we'll get back to it. Ellie, I see you're saying that you're going through my analysis of Biba's cause of death and want to present a counter. Yeah, feel free to send it to me via email. I'm also happy, if you would like, I'm happy to address it on a future stream, provide your counter and share my thoughts on it if you're interested. Can I also
suggest, because I think that topic was quite exciting for a lot of people, and lots of people had different thoughts about it. If you would like to host a room on our Discord, that could be a really fun way for a bunch of people to engage.
Yeah, true. And Gilad, you're welcome to join as well. I see you've been commenting about that. But just to get back to...
Yeah, so that, Ellie, that's another option. We could have a conversation about it on Discord. So let me know, email me, let me know if you prefer to do a public convo about it for the community, or just have me address it on stream. And, to all viewers here viewing on YouTube, you're more than welcome to join our community where we're doing almost daily conversations. You can find a link to that in the description. Awesome. So to continue.
So from there, we drove down to, from there, we wanted to check out Syria. And we started with the mountain, Bental, that I think you had climbed up as a soldier, and we couldn't get in. And it was already dusk at that point. They had closed down access to the mountain. But we thought that from the mountain, it'd be a really nice outlook. We could see the Syrian border and the DMZ and all of that area. But we couldn't quite get in. And so we just started kind of like driving adjacent to the border. And then we saw a bunch of soldiers. And we started speaking to them. We asked them some questions. They had been stationed deep in Syria. Do you remember how much? They said like 3 kilometers or something, like in Syria. And then they came out to just to chill for a little bit. And then it turned out that right behind them was the old Syrian headquarters, a deserted building that just seemed totally dilapidated and graffitied out. And we went to check that out. A bunch of people, I think, on the stream here saw that live.
We showed the Discord community everything.
Yeah, the Discord community got to see everything, which was cool. And Beata tried to scare me. For some reason, it's just hallways, just hollowed out.
So Adam was looking for me, and then Adam stepped outside, and I was trying to scare. I saw him, and I was trying to scare because he was yelling my name, and I just wasn't responding. I wasn't responding, and then I saw him through the window, so I was like, whatever, screw it. And then I go into the hallway of the building to get to Adam, and then I walk out, and Adar jump scares me.
Well, because I was walking, and I overheard you say you wanted to scare Adam. I'm like, okay, hold my proverbial beer, and then I hid. Should we show them the video of you being scared?
Well,
I also want to show. Do we have any videos of the view of Syria from?
Yeah.
So then, after we went to the headquarters, we drove to an outlook post, and Adar said that the last time he'd been there, everything around us had been on fire because it was the war. What war was it?
It was the
We can even
Syrian civil war. It was a Syrian civil war. So
But it's insane to go to all these places for me because it's peaceful in all of these places right now, and to imagine what it was like during periods of violence.
This was it, right? If you want to follow along, you guys can see my screen.
Oh, click on his screen.
Hold on. Hold on, Adam.
It's loading.
It's loading. There we go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we headed out from here, this area, and then we drove up to. First, we did Rajar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where was that? It was around. I don't really remember. We ended up in Majd al-Shams here, and then Rajar was. I think, no. Lebanon.
Do you have any
Israel.
videos of the view?
Rajar. Yeah, right here.
Yeah, we
So
could
we
show
started
some
here?
videos. Yeah.
And then from here, we drove here to Masaida and then to Majd al-Shams. But the Syrian headquarters was here, right next to Quneitra. And this is the tank. Right, so we want to check out these tanks. And then here.
So maybe I'll show.
And Adar, I think you said all of this area was then burning.
Yeah, I have. That was
last time.
Yeah, in 2014. I have some videos of that we could also share.
Oh yeah, we did want to look at that.
But yeah, it was chaos. It was the day I got out of reserves. We got delayed like half a day just because there was a full-blown attack on the Quneitra crossing and some that spilled over into Israel. So let's also, I want to show a quick video of the abandoned building because that building was, I mean, I imagine for security reasons they're not doing anything with it, but it's a nice piece of infrastructure. I was thinking like this could be the Berghain of the Golan Heights if there's the right investor, but probably not the right time. Hold on. First, I'll show you an example of just what it was like in there. And then we could show you Beata being scared. Unless you don't want us to, but it's going to be published at some point. There we go. Go live. So how do we? There we go. Wait.
It's that one.
Yeah, I just wanted to see that it's showing. Wait, you see? Oh, maybe. So there's like a hole.
I think this one was more like you.
Look at this hole. There's like a hole that you need to go through barbed wire to get through, which. Anyways, I just want to take you to the hole. Wait, hold on.
Try to find the basement.
Nobody found it. This is the main entrance. And then there's a huge hallway. And so I was hiding in one of these rooms.
And this is like 3 floors. What?
There's 2
You
floors.
get a
in one room.
97 because you're circumcised. No, but isn't that true? No. It goes 97 and then that's why I'm skipping through. You know, this is unedited, unfiltered.
Just
And I
turn
don't,
down the volume. Just turn down the volume.
yeah, fair. Okay, fair. So we don't have a liability on our hands. There's like a courtyard in the back. There could be a whole thing done of the graffiti here. I found like this porta potty that I couldn't open. I didn't open. And more windows, but it was just endless hallway after hallway.
And some graffiti in Arabic, right? I think we saw like a free
Yeah,
Palestine
there's a
one
free
in Arabic.
Palestine.
Oh, interesting. So that was that. Is this showing on stream as well? So 12 will be sitting there. Saw 12. Yeah, exactly. Wait, so now let's do be this
I think
one.
that's it. Yeah.
Go live. Here's where we got Beata.
But you have to press the thing.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I think we missed the. We also while in Majid Shams when we first got there, we went to that restaurant.
Oh yeah.
And I suspect we have some good videos from that if we want to share.
We paused because your preview.
It always does that.
There we go.
Wait, did you? I think you may.
Gotcha.
I got upset because I was like, I was supposed to do that to Adam.
And then you're about to swing at me. Look, this is you about to swing at me. Hold on, and then maybe one more from there. There, I finally found a way out to the roof, which was pretty cool.
I think we should start doing a lot of pictures when we're doing these recaps. I also just remembered we didn't do a recap of the.
Guys, I'm on the roof.
We didn't do a recap of the.
Come to the roof.
What?
We didn't do a recap of Adama. Yes, from day one.
Right. Yeah. Oh, is that all I took of that?
I think they get it.
Okay, that's the gist. But yeah, there's some cool stuff here. Anywho, yeah. Yeah, my channel goes Saw 12 will be filmed there. That would be a great place for Saw 12. For any horror movie, I imagine. Okay. That was that.
Yeah, that, and then we
We
just
also
drove back. And we did the
recorded
recap.
a short video of a commenter on YouTube. Was it on YouTube? No, on Twitter. It was a hater on some of Adar's tweets.
Yeah.
And I have a video. It is unedited yet.
right.
Responding. Should we share this one? I think it could be
fun. I would tell you to share it until the moment I finish reading the comment because
then it becomes
we're gonna there's let's say a fair bit of content that we will only release in like 10 years once we're stable enough that we can let the world see all of it. So stay tuned a decade or so. My channel's asking, weren't we scared that it could be booby trapped? No, at this point, it's been in Israeli territory since 67, and we'd known that there'd been many visitors going there.
That was my dad's first question as well when I told him, but he didn't say booby trap. He said you got to be careful of mines. And if you remember, the village right next to it was called Ein Mokesh. And either like a mine eye.
Interesting. Yeah. There are a lot of areas in the Golan that are fenced off because of a lot of mines. I know if you are in the IDF as a combat engineer, which my brother was, they train them to defuse mines by going to these minefields and slowly but surely clearing them as part of training.
Yeah. Can we switch over to the Adama interviews? Because I feel like we spent a good amount of time there.
Oh, and
we didn't cover it
talk
on
about
the day one
yeah.
recap. So this is backtracking to after we were driving from Nazareth, and then we stopped by Adama.
Yeah. So real quick, T Bishop, just because it's on the structure, abandoned structures, I'd be more concerned about an angry homeless person. In college, I explored vacant properties till I ran into one. So I would say that's probably a concern in the city, but this is such in the middle of nowhere that if you're making that your home, I mean, you don't have access to water or food, so it's not the good place to what's the word when you take over a home?
Squat.
When you squat. Yeah, it's probably not the best place to squat, although the potential is definitely there. Yeah, so Adama, this was day one, but we had to cut the stream short before we got into it. Beata, do you want to?
Well, I mean, I can intro it. Yeah, so we parked. We pretty much were driving on the highway, and then we drove up a hill, and it became a dirt path. And then we were driving on this dirt path with dry bushes, you know, classic Mediterranean landscape. And it was around sunset time. And then we parked and we stepped out, and there's a view of the hills and a beautiful sunset. And we walk from there a couple of feet, and there's these houses that are embedded in the hill. Kind of, Adam said it was kind of like Hobbit style, but it's kind of like it definitely gives off wellness retreat vibes. But the houses are all wooden. It's kind of modern, you know, lots of natural light in the houses. They're small, you know, and they're all lined up close to one another. One is on top of the other on the hill, and it's all just a little commune embedded on the hill. So it's a very pleasant place to live. Lots of natural plants, and it smells very fresh. Lots of different kinds of vibrant flowers, and yeah, I can imagine it being a nice place to live. I personally wouldn't live there for a long time because it's very isolated and quiet, and it's away from everything, and there's no internet because everybody lives without internet. But overall, I would definitely stay there. It's a very pleasant place to be.
Yeah, and just a little more background. You know, I had been at this little wellness festival on the Jordan River probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I met all these people from Adama, and they were all lovely, super warm. And in my mind then, I'm like, okay, I'll need to visit it at some point. So this was a cool opportunity to finally do that. And we were put in touch with somebody there named Ido, but when we got there, we didn't have service. So we just went to the first home we saw. This just lovely lady greeted us. She was kind of like Snow White in the sense that I feel like if she sings, the birds and animals all come. She greeted us barefoot.
She's like a hippie Snow White.
Yeah, and we're like, if you think about it, I feel like Snow White's a hippie, right? She's living out there in a cottage in the forest.
Yeah, but she wears a dress, like a.
Okay, fair. And we asked the
Snow White's an aristocrat.
What's that?
She's an aristocrat.
Is that how the story goes?
I mean, she's a princess.
That's true.
No, I think she came from a kingdom, and then she goes to the cottage, and she meets the dwarves, and then falls asleep there. So
almost like the story
she's
of
an OG
Siddhartha,
aristocrat.
the Buddha. Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it in decades, but. Yeah. So then we say, hey, do you know where Ido is? You're like, oh, I'm his wife. So we just happen to find his wife, the first person we met. And, you know, she told us a little bit about the town. She then invited us in. And then we got to interview her son a little bit, which was interesting because he's 16 years old. And, you know, what's it like growing up there? 16-year-olds are very much in the rebellion phase, and we very much felt this from him. He felt like he didn't love life there. He didn't like that there wasn't enough internet. That I imagine he didn't have enough. He's the oldest one in the town of the youth. The closest one in age is 2 years younger. So he did express some difficulties, but on the other hand, he was also very like intelligent, and you could tell he was raised well, and he certainly, the grass is greener on the other side, you know. He definitely, that upbringing seems to have such clear advantages, but, you know, obviously not. It comes with some challenges as well.
Yeah, and he was speaking Hebrew, so I didn't understand anything he was saying, but just taking in his personality and his energy, it was very interesting because he has like 3 piercings. He has this mullet with long hair growing out the back. He's very skinny, has this feminine appearance, boyish appearance, and the way that he spoke was very confident, and I was surprised by that given he was so young.
Right. Yeah.
It seemed like he was making very clear and concise points without any hesitation, and that really impressed me.
Yeah, he was sharp. Yeah, he was very intelligent.
When we started, basically as we walked in, we asked this lady, like, what is this place? And But by the way, Altoids, the person we're talking about is the son of these two folks that we went to interview, and who run this eco village, right? And so they're just there as like part of the community. It felt to me like, I don't know if anybody's played like, are they Jewish? Yes. I don't know if you've played any like, although when we asked him if he identifies as Jewish, I don't think he did. He says he thinks God is stupid. Believing God is stupid. Anybody who believes in a deity is an idiot.
Right.
Joseph would say, okay, that's acceptable too.
Yeah.
So, and I asked him, are you Israeli? Do you identify as Israeli? Do you identify as a Zionist? And, right, Adar, you asked them.
Well, you first said you asked Israeli first.
Yeah, I asked Israeli. And he's like, well, yeah, of course, I'm here.
What else would I be?
Yeah, like, who else would I be? I'm here, of course. But do you care about the politics and like the country and like what's happening? It's like, no, it's all stupid. I just care about Dungeons and Dragons.
And video games.
Yeah, video games. Like, so what do you want to see in this world? Better internet, so I can play Dungeons and Dragons more effectively. So that was it. But then, so when we first came in, well, no, we asked him if he was a Zionist. Do you remember what his answer was?
Well, yeah, I said, and do you consider yourself a Zionist? He says, the word is Tzioni, Ata, Tzioni. He's like, what's that mean? And he didn't. It's almost as if he'd never heard the word. And then his mom and Adam clarified. Liot. How was the clarification?
No,
from Tzionut. Yeah, and he understood. You're right. And I don't even remember what he said to that. I don't recall his response.
Like, I think he said, I don't know, I don't care.
Right.
So when we first came in, when we asked his mother, like, so what is this place? We have no idea. And she said, okay, well, this was an extension of the 13 Moons subculture. Do you know about that? Adal, do you remember? There's like 13 moons. Maybe we can get into that. But there's a couple of different movements of like trying to live more connected to the land, right? So you have these different movements that honestly, it looks just like a slightly fancier, like glamping. You guys, you know glamping? It's like glamorous camping or whatever.
Yeah, that thought crossed my mind too.
Yeah, it looks it's not quite camping because the structures weren't as flimsy, right, as a tent. But it wasn't just like a concrete built. No, it's like wooden, almost like what you see like when children build like these like wooden like tree houses, right? It's just like it's just a slightly nicer tree house on the ground, and there's no like paths. There's nothing paved. You're just going from like one piece of soil to the next, and you're just like walking from like they walk barefoot, just through the shrubbery and the plants. And we asked them, like, but what is the extent of it? Like, do you live here for like many years? What's going on? She said, we've been here for 16 years. The whole idea is to be close to nature, to live close to nature, and to give birth in a natural way. All these women there have been giving birth naturally in these houses. In this kid, he was the first one to actually be born this way over there. So that's sort of what happened. And then afterwards we came in and she gave us some tea and we started, and he's like, what are you guys doing? And we started talking to him and I was like, oh, it must be amazing to live here, right? And he's like, it's fucking terrible. I hate this place. And I can't wait until I move out. And I'm like, oh, what? Maybe we interview you. So then we set up the whole camera setup. Like, it was pretty nice. We got in the living room for about an hour. We were just grilling him on questions. Right?
And he said that in front of his mom, right?
His mom.
But wasn't his mom's idea for us to interview him? Like, it's almost like she knew he would have a different perspective than them.
Yeah, and as he was saying these horrific things about his like upbringing, and he's like, I hate this place. There's no electricity. We don't what do you do? Like, it's cold in the winter. Like, I have to. There's no light. The light always flickers. Like, the place sucks, and we don't know anybody, and it's just mud. Why? And his mom is just in the kitchen laughing, right? Because I think she probably knows that he might be exaggerating. I don't really know what to make of all of that. It could just be fanciful telling of the story. It looked wonderful. It looked beautiful when we were there. And then when I kept zooming in, I'm like, okay, what does it actually mean if it's cold in the winter? Like, you don't they have fire. So they're fine. They have blankets. I think it really comes down to the internet. That was my takeaway. And
Right.
it's good enough for him to know what he's missing, and that's it. And so just deeply frustrating because of it. And the dude is now, I think he's 16. He just dropped out, or he got his high school, it was like mandatory high school stuff finished, and now he's becoming a yoga instructor.
Yeah.
So what about the father?
And then as we were interviewing him, the father came home, and then we sat him down for an interview, and he was fascinating. Such a unique and inspiring worldview. He spoke about the core of their philosophy is about the fact that all religions are trying to tell the same truth and understand and respecting all these different religious beliefs. And then he spoke about the concept of existing within natural time and not this other time we know where you set an alarm and wake up at a certain hour and everything is scheduled. It's more of a living in a flow state with natural time. I don't know, Adam, maybe you want to elaborate on that explanation.
Yeah, like the example that he gave was that of the orange. He says it's not like the orange is ever like, I'm late, I have to be ripe. No, it's when the conditions are right, when all the factors that lead to the ripeness of the orange arrive, that's when the orange ripens. And what happened with humanity, with civilization over the course of probably the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the clock and the watch and the more mechanical time, is that we've created an artificiality in our lives. But nevertheless, there is a natural time. And that natural time is what is guiding our own development and the developments of our lives. Yet we are still anchored onto this artificial time. And that gap produces a dissonance. And that dissonance manifests in all sorts of pathologies, both personal and social. And the idea of these movements, like the 13-month calendar movement, is to try to come into better terms with a synchronous, with reducing the gap between artificial time and natural time, for all of us to actually be embodying the natural time and to have natural time be the one that dictates the rhythm of our lives. And the goal of this community, this eco-village, is to demonstrate for themselves and for others what it looks like to live in a more naturally rhythmic manner. You can feel, as soon as we were talking to his son, and the son was saying things that the father disagreed with, and the mother started freaking out that the son is saying all sorts of things. You could just see that he was emanating this peaceful,
right, very grounded, calm and peaceful. Now, maybe this is a good moment to acknowledge a mishap we had that's still causing us some pain. But this was our first day shooting, and as we left the mine, we're reviewing the footage, we noticed that the audio wasn't working for any of his interview. So unfortunately, it's currently only exists in our memory. And then for me, it was a bummer that we don't get to share what he said with the world. But I was even more bummed that, and I think we shared this sentiment, that we were more bummed that we just took an hour of his time even more, and we don't even have something to show for it. And then we were kind of saying, well, if anybody's understanding of this mishap, it would be someone like him. He's back in natural time. By the time he knows the footage is gone, he'll be long over it. And so there's been a little update that Beata and Adam, you don't even know yet, but an hour ago, I got a message from him. And he says, thank you so much for coming. I had an idea. We're about to release this course, and we'd love to use some of the content from the filming to promote this course. Can you send it to us? And then... oh,
no. Did you tell him?
I didn't respond yet. No. I need to construct the right message in natural time. But...
No. Adar, here's my suggestion. We go back there and we say, we think we should do it on the land with light and a daylight.
I think we own it. We say, look, we messed up, but we would love to come back and not only re-interview, but we will do it in a way that is specific for your course on us. So we'll make up for it. Yeah.
I thought the question was, we ended up going in. We asked him about Zionism, and we asked him about settlers, and I think that it took a very interesting direction.
Right.
When we did, because he said that in many ways he is a Zionist, right? Didn't he? Did you? in the sense that he loves the land.
Well, he said
But-
he didn't say he's a Zionist. He said, I feel very connected to Zion. I think that's how he
To Zion.
described it, as a way, like a connection to the land. Yeah. Less so, I think that was his way of separating it from like the state, but more so the connection to the land. Yeah.
The connection to the land and to the ancestry that we have on the land, and and not to the religious, but to the Jewish like lineage from the land. And he seemed very connected, but at the same time totally cognizant of the fact that we don't have the right tools, conceptual, technological, social, to actually exist on the land at the moment, and that it requires innovation in order to figure out how to do it in a way that respects the land and our neighbors and others living in it. And that requires not looking back into the past to see how did we do it back then? How did the Jews live on the land, 2,000 years ago? And let's recreate that. He says, no, whatever was in the past is in the past. What we need to do is to focus on the future and on the present, and we need to invent new ways to develop society and our concepts in order to allow our living here to flourish. Because I do love the land. He loves the land. He loves Zion, and he loves that lineage and the connection to it, which was very interesting. It was a very different take. It is one that was very rooted in soil and respect. It almost sounded a little like Native American.
Right.
Yeah. I just remembered that we forgot to talk about the man that we met in Nazareth.
No, we spoke about it in the first stream, I believe. In the update then,
right,
yeah.
That was day one.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that was day one.
Sorry,
I'll get
I take it back.
It's been intense.
Yeah.
But I do want to say that like after he said that, we asked him if there are any parallels between his type of project and the project that we might get more of a sense of in the West Bank among settlers. Because there's a type of settler that we see that you go and it's just a couch, right? Or it's just whatever, it's a tree and they built some stuff around the tree. It is very like soil oriented,
right?
And it's all about like a minimalistic, more primitive type of existence that is what is the structure that's necessary to just support a life there and nothing else. And there does seem to be like, I don't know if like a spiritual or like a dematerial kind of like embodiment of that type of philosophy among settlers. So we asked him if there's parallels that he's seeing. And he said that for many of their events, the ones they do in the north and by the rivers and there's a few different events.
Yeah, it's called and rainbow gatherings is something they're very connected to. Yeah.
Rainbow gatherings and
which is like a month spending a month in nature with people, and there's music and dancing and all that stuff. Yeah.
He said that many settlers show up there, which I thought blew my mind a little bit. I mean, you don't really imagine that. He said that sometimes we're driven, obviously, by like a slightly different motivation, but there's also some overlap, which, in my mind, where my head went was, could it be that if a movement like his, the one of returning to the land, but within the state, was a little bit more ascendant and popular, could that take some of the energy out of a settler movement?
Interesting.
If youth could see that they could recreate that type of primitive existence, not on the West Bank, but in the West Galilee, what does that do? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like it's perhaps a belief system that is close enough to where settlers are, where they could like recognize it and understand it, but it's a way more inclusive type of worldview. And he acknowledged that. He said, I very much connect with settlers in the sense that we have this connection to the land, but he acknowledged that clearly there's going to be ideological differences with how they see things. So yeah, that was fascinating. Maybe we'll open it up now to some community commentary questions. Oh, maybe one more thing. And Adam, I didn't even fill you in on this, but in the next few days, and I won't say exactly when, just for security purposes, but we are going to be going to Mount Gerizim, which is where the Samaritan community live. It's right next to Nablus. And, the Samaritans are a fascinating community who have lived here in their community continuously for thousands of years. there's not many of them left. There's only 800, around 500 in Israel proper, and then around 300 in Mount Gerizim. Mount Gerizim, and they have their own version of the Torah that's very similar to the Jewish Torah. So they are an ancient Israelite population with just a slightly different book, but their Jerusalem is Mount Gerizim. So just a little bit context about them. So we're going to visit them, but we've been very hesitant to go to Nablus when we're there. It's a city we're unfamiliar with. We don't know, like right now is now a good time to go. So we weren't planning on going into Nablus, and it's still not the plan, but I may make a case that we should test it out. We met some guy today. Beat and I are in Herzliya currently, and we met a guy at the Golda, which is Israel's top ice cream place. He's the franchise owner of two different branches. He was an Israeli Arab guy, so I started talking to him. And he expressed a very similar identity to the guy we met in Nazareth. He said, "Yeah, of course, I'm Israeli. I was born here. But are you Palestinian?" He's like, "Yeah, Palestinian. That's the people I come from, but I'm an Israeli national." And the way he equated it, he said, "Look, you could be an Israeli whose family came from France, right? It's a similar concept in that sense." So the Israeli Arab / Palestinian citizen of Israel, their identity is fascinating and diverse. So we're trying to dig deeper and ask as many as possible. And then
yeah, he was also surprised that Nazareth is a primarily Muslim Palestinian Israeli town.
No, it wasn't.
He said he didn't know.
No, he was surprised. I mentioned that we met a lot of people in Nazareth that didn't speak Hebrew, and he was actually surprised. He was actually surprised by that. He's from a town in central Israel where I think virtually everybody speaks Hebrew, so that was new information for him. But in talking to him, he explained that he bought an apartment building in Nablus that he rents out to students for cheap because there's rent issues there. So he's trying to really create a space for students. And he said we should go. And I'm like, really? We're not sure. He's like, bro, you could drive in. They have all these awesome places. You could sit in the evening with this beautiful view, smoking hookah, some of the best hummus full specifically, he said, is in Nablus. And he highly recommended that we go.
He was such a good guy. It was actually insane.
And he even gave Beata the ice cream for free. He didn't charge her.
It was so nice.
It's possible we do. We'll talk about it, but that's a little new tidbit.
We'll see if we can take the Samaritans.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe if we go with Abud. Yep. T Bishop says the Samaritan Passover event looks like a blast. Yeah, that was a few weeks ago. I almost went. I was considering going, but I had some family event, so hopefully next year. And maybe with that, do we want to open it up to the community?
Yeah, and I have to head out now, but thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure.
Catch up soon, Beata.
Yeah.
And then there were 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that. So, yeah, chat, community, feel free, ask questions, share thoughts. Sure, yeah.
So what is any other thoughts on the Jewish community and the skirmishes between the Jewish community of Syria and the HTS government?
That's a great question, and we did not dive into that yet, but thanks for flagging that, because we are going to speak to a fair bit more Druze, and I'm definitely open and interested in understanding more about that. What was cool, we did go to their holiday. So their main prophet is Jethro, which is Moses's father-in-law, and his tomb is in Kfar Hitin, which is near Tiberias. So we went to the shrine for the holiday, and for the first time in many decades, Syrian Jews were allowed in to this shrine. So 700 Syrian Jews got permits, and we were there the day after they had all been there, and we were talking to the Druze about how it was reuniting, and they said it was such a celebration, family members that haven't seen each other in decades, family members who have never met. So you know, the instability in Syria for many reasons should be concerning, but I think the Druze community currently are hopeful that this might give them more access to their family, and you know, I think the Druze community, who they are generally nationalist in the states they would love to be in a situation where they could visit all family members, all communities without problems or checkpoints. So they're certainly hoping for that future, and it was cool to see that there's some start of that. But yeah, Altoids, we'll look into that more and get back to you about the skirmishes.
Thanks.
Anyone else? No? Okay, it looks like no more questions. Chat also seems to be no more here. Adam, anything you'd like to add in, or do we wrap it up? Anyways, by the way, I see, hold on, I do see, is it DSN, have a couple minutes after the stream. Is the idea to do a one-on-one chat? Wait, Altoids, you're asking, are they Jewish? Who are you referring to specifically?
Come again?
I see you say in chat, are they Jewish? Interesting. Who's that in reference to?
Oh, in reference to the eco community or whatever it was.
Okay, sorry. So I wasn't paying attention to Discord chat. So yeah, they're not religious, no, but ethnically they're Jewish, yeah. So DS, is the idea? Do you want to have a one-on-one chat, or do you want to? What's your idea?
Yeah, I'm a graduate student. If you remember, I did write you a couple of times, right? We should meet.
Oh, okay, sure.
Tomorrow, I just wanted a couple of minutes, right, of your time.
Sure. Happy to.
Thanks.
Very much happy to. And by the way, guys, just so you know, yesterday we had our longest our longest community conversation to date. It lasted for over 10 hours. We don't know when it ended because we all ended up going to bed here, but 10 hours straight of a conversation. Obviously, some people were coming in and out, but that's the start of something very, very real, very, very cool and inspiring. So just wanted to shout that out.
It ended at 4:30 in the morning.
Okay, so 10 and a half hours. Good job, guys.
Yeah. I ended it. I felt sorry for Ahmed. You know, it was already 4:30 where he was at.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Well, you know, the day will come where any moment of the day, there'll be multiple rooms open. Not at that point, it won't be on Discord. It'll be on platform, on the head-on platform we're building. But this is definitely the start. So if no one has anything else, we're gonna start getting ready for Yom Ha'atzmaut, and maybe some words on that. You know, today's the saddest day. Oh, actually, we didn't even talk about what we did yesterday. We might as well update on that. So right now is Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day. It's the saddest day of the year for Israelis because every Israeli knows somebody who's been killed either in war or in a terror attack. Very much true for Palestinians as well. And so we all mourn, all Israelis mourn collectively. Well, yesterday we went to a joint Yom HaZikaron memorial that was for Israelis and Palestinians. And the idea is to collectively mourn. And there's something so beautiful about this because right now, you know, you have like Jewish holidays and Israeli holidays, and then you have Muslim holidays and some holidays that are just Palestinian. But this is potential to be the first day we commemorate together as a shared people. And what more beautiful way to do it than collectively mourning the loss. Now, this is a very fringe group. There's a very small group of people mourning together, but it is an example of what can be. And I find it to be very inspiring. And the way Memorial Day goes is it lasts 24 hours, and the minute it ends, Independence Day begins. It's one holiday leading into the other. And the reason for this is intentional. It's to break out of the sorrow. It's to, we just mourn the whole day. Now it's time to celebrate. So the country goes from very sad to very happy instantly. And it's very interesting concept. But what also is interesting and sad is that as we celebrate our Independence Day, Palestinians are celebrating Nakba Day, their catastrophe, right? Our independence was their catastrophe. So, I hope to see the day where we can actually commemorate and celebrate these days together, where we are mourning our losses together as a collective. And then when it comes to celebrate independence, Palestinians can celebrate their independence with us, right? That is the future we should be working towards.
There was an attack right in Ra'anana on the joint Yom HaZikaron.
Yeah, so I actually didn't mention that because I didn't look into it, and I didn't want to speak from ignorance. But what I came to understood is that a group of far right Israelis actually. So we went to a screening of the main event. The main event was closed. It was open to the bereaved families of Israelis and Palestinians. And it was in Ra'anana, and a group of far-right radicals actually, I don't know if they attacked or they went to protest. Things seem to have escalated a little bit. Again, I did not look into all the details, so if somebody wants to pull them up. But yeah, so that's, out of all the people that you want to attack the bereaved families on Memorial Day because of how they choose to mourn, pretty indefensible, if you ask me. But it
was very similar. It was very similar to what happened in New York. There was actual physical, and police had to separate it. Also, I believe the same organization that sponsored it, they did a week ago, they did another protest, and they were holding up pictures of dead children in Gaza.
Yeah.
So Omdim B'Yachad right now has been banned from Bar Ilan University. So actually, universities now are actually banning them from the campus.
Oh, interesting.
They had a circle. It was Palestinians and Israelis, and because they were holding children up, that the problem with these protesters is that, well, the protests, I should say, is that they're being tolerated, but whenever any focus is given on Gaza, they get a police reaction and a right-wing reaction.
Right.
They are trying to contain that the protesters be about reform, about Netanyahu, about corruption. But as soon as you put images of Palestinians and stuff, it's interesting how they get such a big backlash.
Yeah. And if I'm to try to completely steelman the position of those who came and protested the Memorial Day service, the way they see it is, we are mourning our dead, and you are deciding to mourn our dead with those who killed our family members, right? They view it as like a major betrayal. That's probably their rationale to it. Is that a good rationale? We'll leave that up to the viewers to decide. But
I would say I would say that would be the case. But the situation with Bar Ilan University and the situation with the protesters, it happened a week ago. It didn't happen during the Yom Ha'atzmaut.
Yeah, I actually wanted to go deeper on that point. I just wanted to mention the protest, but Adam, you have a different perspective, and then Justin, let's go deeper in the protest, because that is interesting what you explained.
Yeah, no, just not necessarily. I have a different perspective. I suspect that what people who are worried about the Memorial Day joint service, they might also say that it's that you're politicizing a situation that shouldn't be political. And there's a lot of like, there's a fear of politicizing certain things that it's like, this is the one day, we have 2-3 days where you get politics out and it's just us collectively feeling, and don't smuggle in your politics here. Don't hijack those moments in order to serve a political agenda. And so I feel like you hear that voice very often.
Right, right.
This would seem to them to be a political agenda, right? You can make a case that it isn't, but to them it might seem like it is.
Right. Now, but granted, if there was someone using it for a political agenda on the other side, they wouldn't feel nearly as sensitive about it, right? If this was like a Memorial Day service for those who want to resettle Gaza, it's also, again, I don't even know if that exists. I'm just giving an example.
But I think it's more than that. I think that anytime there's any kind of public affection toward even the children, we had a situation about a month ago in Beersheba at a school where there was a 12, or she was either 12 or 13-year-old middle school student was forced to leave the school because she made a comment, something like, "I feel sorry for the children of Gaza."
Right, yep. She was bullied for it.
And so it's not just because of what Adam was saying, particularly because, you're politicizing the event. We have seen continuously how anytime any joint thing is done and where it's trying to say like, hey, the death in Gaza and stuff, it's been pretty much crushed or attacked and sometimes quite violently.
Right. Yeah. So more on that, I think that when we look at Israel has a big protest culture. We've had massive protests, but you're right. They're not saying it's not about human rights abuses of Palestinians. Israelis, the way they view it, they're not in a position to care for others. It's very much ourselves and our survival. And then there's sometimes you have like a very small group talking specifically of like state violence, right? But it's always been a fringe group. What we're seeing now with standing together, we're seeing record number of Israelis who are actually calling to an end for violence, not to get the hostages back, but actually they're holding up photos of dead Palestinian children. This is a new wave that we've never seen. We've never seen it in this size. And then the way that Israel is trying to crack down on this, but I think we're kind of seeing cracks in not cracks in the system, but at least in the population. There's almost like this a little awakening of people who are like, whoa, we just can't keep killing civilians for a war that has no clear purpose, right? I think that's how more and more Israelis are seeing it. The way most Israelis, though, perceive that is you're a traitor, right? The whole world is against us. We're fighting for survival, and you are giving fodder to our enemies. They very much think, like, why get caught up in the details? See the big picture. Okay, children die. This is war, but they're our enemy. We need to survive. We need to win. And they view anybody, speaking about the horrors of what's happening in Gaza to be a traitor. And it comes with backlash. I go speaking from a bit of experience here. Monoro says, I always wonder, this is on YouTube. And for those in Discord, just know that this is being streamed. So keep that in mind if you're going to speak or turn your camera on. But Monoro says, I always wonder why such a big part of Israelis are so self-centered. And so I can understand that perception. I think the answer is simple. We're in a mindset of scarcity. We believe that we're holding on for dear life, you could say. We feel like the world is turning on us. That if we don't look out for ourselves and for each other, then we'll be doomed. When you're in a mindset of scarcity, it's very hard to think about others. It's very hard to be compassionate or show empathy for others. So that was.
Can I add? It's probably similar to scarcity, but I think fear would be right up there as well. Like even yesterday when we walked out of the memorial,
that would be a scarcity of security.
Yeah. Exactly. So,
but it's interesting because how it's viewed from the outside, especially from the Palestinian side, is that there's this sense that it's almost as if It's a matter of exclusivity. We feel that Israelis and Jews feel that their suffering is somehow above ours. You know, don't talk about the Holocaust. Don't talk about what we went through. Yeah, and even among those who will admit to say that Palestinians have suffered, but when it comes, people like this just don't want to hear it. They don't want to equate it. So it's almost, I think we call it the chosen people syndrome. That's actually a phrase that we used to use. We are the chosen people syndrome. And that sort of says that we have an exclusivity when it comes to the ultimate suffering. And this is how we view it. I know that you're saying that it's from fear. It's from, feeling this, but this is how it's viewed from our side.
Right. And I hear that, but I would say seems to be a pretty consistent pattern of historically oppressed groups and their sense of victimhood, which becomes part of their identity. And I see it very present in the Jewish community. I see it present in the Palestinian community, and I see it present in the African American community, that they wear their oppression on their sleeve, and they walk this earth kind of through seeing it through the lens of their own victimhood. And again, I'm not judging, because I understand what conditions can lead a person to this, but I think it's an unfortunate result of oppression because it's a disempowering worldview. So while there might be some things that are specifically unique to the Jewish people and how they see things, I do think there are many other examples of this similar types of behavior.
What makes it unique is that Israel is in a position of power. I mean, it's hard for me to see that Israel, who's a regional power, who's enforcing an occupation and has the ability to way above its people, yet they still claim to be victims. I can't see Israelis saying we are victims of Palestinians. It's just hard for me to say that. Black people have still been disenfranchised from power. Palestinians are still disenfranchised. So the victimization can still be played. If Palestinians were to get the upper hand and become the rulers and then still cry victims, then we would be doing the same thing.
They're right, but there's many ways and processes to get to the point where you're oppressed or victimized. It's not like that the second you are more powerful, that worldview goes away. So we now have power after being powerless for so long. And I would say we don't seem to know how to wield that power responsibly. But we don't just view this as us against the Palestinians. We view it potentially us against the world, us against the Middle East. There's this lack of trust. There's this uncertainty about the future. There's demographic concerns. So as much as we're powerful, it's not like we feel super confident in our security. So for a population that's so historically oppressed, it doesn't matter that we have power. We're still in fear, and people in fear respond a certain way. So again, there's definitely differences, but I don't think it makes a fundamental difference to the psychology. I would just say perhaps it's a more dangerous combination. This deep sense of victimhood with a very powerful military clearly has some pretty horrible results in terms of human rights. So that it's probably a pretty problematic combination. But I would say, and Justin, because of that, if the tables were turned and Palestinians had the power and Jews didn't, I don't think we'd be in a kumbaya situation here. I think, again, these are people who have been victimized for so long, now have power, that very well may be expressed in a way that is, fueled by revenge and spite and, vengeance. And then the cycle continues, right? We need to break out of this cycle somehow.
I want to make a little correction, right? So this incident with the Standing Together protest, right, in the university, it wasn't in Bar Ilan. I think it was in Haifa, right?
You know what? I might be wrong about the university. I thought it was Bar Ilan, but I think it wasn't
no.
Haifa. But yeah, because Bar Ilan
it was yes. It wasn't Haifa.
Which university was it?
1 moment. Open an article. University of Haifa. Which is in itself. Yeah, I don't know the reputation of the university itself, but Haifa is a very
Haifa University is a
makes sense.
I would say University of Haifa is much more a reputation as far as like academic or
no, in terms of politics.
No, I would say Haifa University is much more the scene at Haifa is much more. It's much more mixed. Bar Ilan, I think, you'd find a more conservative sort of. I wouldn't say it's like a right-wing university, but definitely University of Haifa's students, I would say, and body would definitely be more mixed and diverse and things like that.
Okay.
But but thank you for correcting. I thought it was. I said Bar Ilan, but it wasn't Bar Ilan. You're correct. It was University of Haifa.
Yeah, sure. I'll maybe share an anecdote right on this. I saw recently a TikTok right in Russian speaking, presumably Israeli person saw an advertisement right of the Standing Together movement right on the street with the pictures of dead children from Gaza, and she was very, very inflamed, right, very enraged. She was calling the police, right, and making a show of it for TikTok, and it had some views, right. So, the situation is not great.
And I'll put the picture of what they did. This is a picture here in the chat of what they did.
Cool. I see Monoro on YouTube is saying that was the reasoning in South Africa. I think that's probably in reference to what I mentioned about Israeli fear about the tables turning. And yeah, if you look at actually videos from the 50s of South Africans and how they're justifying apartheid, it's very similar arguments that are currently made in justification of Zionism today. That's not to say that there's that there's no distinction, but if you look at the rationale that it's about security, it's about demographic concern, about cultural differences, that for that reason or fear we need that separation. Yeah, it's a lot of the same justifications. What I would go on to say is, if you are a white South African and your interest is preserving your own people and culture there, now that apartheid has ended, which is a good thing, we could agree it's a good thing. It's not that turned out well for white South Africans who now have a decreasing population in South Africa and are leaving as a result of violence. And I've heard people say that the violence is not targeted specifically towards whites, it's just targeted towards everybody. But ultimately, so their society is not thriving, and it is causing a collapse of the same population. So in a sense, their fear was warranted, right? Does that justify apartheid? No, but we need to recognize that people are self-interested. People are going to value their own infinitely more than they're going to value others. This is just an aspect of human nature that we need to come to terms with. That doesn't mean that we need to accept that it's okay to oppress others for our benefit, but we need to understand that people generally are going to look out for their own. So the way to get Israelis to agree to a solution, the best way is it will require pressure without a doubt, but it should be a solution that doesn't make them feel like it will lead to their danger or destruction, right? If a solution can be presented to Israelis that they don't fear, they're much more likely to accept it. The same way Palestinians are going to need a solution that is truly just for them. And many for good reason think that these two goals, a just solution and a secure solution, are incompatible. But I think there's many ways that we can achieve that for both people.
You're saying that case of South Africa where they have fears and that the population is decreasing now. But when apartheid ended in South Africa, the white population of the country was less than 15%. They were around 13%, I think, in 1992 or something like that, whenever apartheid ended. They were a very small percentage of the population of the country, controlling more than 95% of everything, which is a bit disproportionate in terms of power, and not exactly the case in Israel-Palestine conflict, since the Jewish population currently, I think, is still slightly the majority and controls around 70%, 80% of the land, I think. I'm not, as in direct control, population-wise.
Well, so Altoids, we could dedicate a full session to all the differences between apartheid South Africa and Israel, and there's going to be plenty. It's still there's some reasons where these analogies still make sense to understand the human dynamic, right? So them being a smaller minority means their fear was even more justified, right? It gives greater reason for concern. But you're saying because it was such a small amount controlling more, it's fundamentally different. But I think our fear and our rationale for maintaining a system that prefers one group over another stems from very similar concerns and desires. Like if there was no security threat, the Zionism would look very, very different. If we didn't fear for our lives, Zionism would likely not be nearly as oppressive towards Palestinians.
Yeah, but like, for example, if you see the situation, let's say hypothetically speaking, Israel-Palestine becomes one state, or Israel was never created in the first place, and in 1948, Palestine, the mandate of Palestine became Palestine, whatever the case may be. Today, the Jewish population, or the Jewish population of this future state, will still be a very powerful minority, economically, politically, and militarily. Even if today every Israeli decides, let's make a one-state solution and let's call it Palestine, right? And give direct political power to the majority of the population. Let's do the law of return and everything, and all the Palestinians return to the land. Even in that case, Israelis or Jews in general will still hold the majority of the power in the country, because of the fact of you can look at South Africa if you want to go to the perfect example. South Africa.
Wait, but Altoids, aside from acknowledging this to be a difference, and I agree it's a difference, what do you think the relevance of this is
It's relevant, because if you see South Africa, the population of South Africa, the white population, the Boers and the English and even Jews and regular people who live there, they still to this day control the majority of the financial assets of the country, and the majority of the economy, the majority of the businesses, the majority of the banking and farming and all this stuff. In South Africa, less than 10% of the population controls most of the economy. In Israel and Palestine, even during the mandate period, Jews held most of the economic power in the land. As in, they brought a lot of investment, a lot of industries, and a lot of corporations came with the Jewish migration to the land, and they control a lot of the economy back then. And if there was a country unified today, the Jews still will control the land. Now, why am I saying this? Why will they control the economy? Why will that matter? Because if you see the arguments that the people in South Africa makes against whites, is not that they hate them because of their skin color per se directly, but that's not the justification they give for the hate that they receive, is the financial problem that they control. They still to this day control most of the economy. Even though they're not the majority of the population, they control most of the economy. There was there were no proper redistribution of anything of the sort, enough land reform or anything of the sort when apartheid collapsed. It was just political empowerment, but no economic empowerment. Even though the South African government, under Mandela and later on leaders, they passed laws to try to empower the black population, which didn't exactly empower the blacks, but rather the colored people, which was already quite integrated into the apartheid system anyways. And if you go to Israel, what will cause the problem later on, if you have this country, will be that the Jews still will hold power. Sure, you can say, well, there's a democracy and people vote for the president and the leaders. But at the end of the day, even in that case, they will still control the politics of the country. And that will make people evidently mad. And since it's going to be a unified country now, it's not like how it is today with the status quo. It will be just very easy for a person and let's say, town A to go to town B and commit acts of violence in both sides. And that's I think that's the core of the issue on why people are scared of, let's say, a one-state solution or a solution that a federation solution with the West Bank, or even annexing the West Bank in any type of form. Even the people who is like not in favor of the settlements, they will not want to. There's just this fear that people will just have an easier way to commit acts of violence if there was a solution which includes integrating the West Bank in any form.
Right. Yeah. No. I. So it almost sounds like you're describing a similarity between our situation and the situation in South Africa. But I agree completely. I think that's why one-state solution is so terrifying for so many Israelis, because the idea of two populations that have now been in conflict for a century competing over demographic and political control seems to that it will likely end in disaster. And
it's even worse than South Africa in that case. Now that you mentioned that, because South Africa, there was never a real war between the black population and the white population.
There was less of a history of violence. There's less of it. Yeah,
there was not as much.
Right.
We were in open war with Palestinians in 1947, 48. They were open war with Arab countries in since then, which the Palestinians cling to, like the Palestinian organizations, they cling to the Arab war, invasions, wars, etc., conflict in general. So you have this aspect that there's being an open conflict. Is not like a oppressed group trying to just fight another the government that has always been in power in the country for 100 years. In this case, the Palestinians have actively fought against the Israelis
you haven't been at war with the Palestinians. In 1947, the Palestinians that were fighting were not part of an organized army of a nation. They were people, local-based people from different tribes and stuff.
It was the Palestinian, the old Palestinian government.
No, but there was no all Palestinian government. Do you understand that comparable to the ANC, which did have militants, which did have fighters that did fight against it, it would be similar to that. But to say that it was like South Africa versus Namibia or Mozambique or another country that had an army, a national, that was not the case. You can't.
I think
in 1947.
I think it might be more so a semantic difference, because in the mind, the way it's perceived as Israelis, it's a threat nonetheless. Whether it's a single militant group or a military, these are all different entities that pose a threat to security. So I think it's in the mind, psychologically, it feels very similar, despite there being fundamental differences.
Yeah. And Justin, to you, because if you see the case that you represent Namibia and all these situations, South Africa was in war with Namibia, with the Namibian rebels. But South Africa, the people in South Africa itself, in Cape Town, Johannesburg, maybe I'm wrong because maybe I'm not refreshed enough in the history of South Africa, but there were no bombings. There were not massive acts of violence or constant acts of violence. Most of the history of the protest and attacks against the apartheid system was mostly peaceful, or not peaceful in the sense that they did not do organized acts of violence against the system itself en masse.
Yeah, you might want to refresh yourself on history.
Okay, I will. But point is, the case in the West Bank specifically is that the West Bank is mostly Palestinian, correct? It's mostly Arab. If you go to Tel Aviv, the territory is mostly Jewish. If you go to Cape Town has always been a very diverse city between whites, color, and black population of the country. It was very hard to make the apartheid system a thing, because you can just displace 90% of the population and make it happen. That's why it was always very hard to maintain anyways. And a system like that will collapse eventually. Why hasn't collapsed in Israel Palestine? Because there's not that many Arabs in the so-called Israel proper territories. and they keep the control of the West Bank, and they separated Gaza from the rest of the conflict basically until 2023. They just kept it isolated.
Anyone else want to chime in?
If you calculate total, Abdullah, that's true. The total. He left.
Wait, Altoids,
Well, anyway.
Altoids, just read the comment out so we the viewers can know what you're responding to.
If you calculate total Israeli Jews and Palestinians from the river to the sea, whether in Israel, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Jerusalem, Palestinians outnumber Israeli Jews. I believe that's the case, but it's a very small, slight number.
There's been figures like 51, 52%, so it's not like 80%. So, and there's also a big debate about, some people say the West Bank population is about, and because the percentage is so small, because you have to understand the whole population of the entire country is about 15 million. So in the West Bank, there's a dispute whether there's 2.7 million Palestinians or 3 million Palestinians. And I think this is the confusion.
People who argue there's even less of people who actually live there full time.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is that, like you said, there's cities where you say like people may live maybe part of the year, like for example, people like me, for example, they might live there part of the year, not all the year, etc. And then there's people who don't have identity who live there. It's a very weird number. There's people who live there they don't have an identity. They're there, stuck there because their identity was revoked, so they can't leave the country, or because if they leave, they won't be able to come back. So it's a difficult number. But
I had a friend who went to the West Bank slightly before October 7th, and he went to a town. Maybe you know more about this town. I don't know. I don't know the name of the town. Maybe you know what town it is. He went to this town in the West Bank, in Samaria, and he talked to the mayor, and he saw the town. It's a very nice town, a lot of new buildings, a lot of very nice buildings, houses, a lot of houses. And he asked but the town seemed empty. So he asked the mayor, "What's going on here? Why so many why the town looks so nice? Why there's like everything so new and everything, but the town seems empty?" He's like, "Oh no, people come here for summer. We currently have a population of around 1,600 people, but on summer it becomes 10,000." And that was like an interesting thing. I don't know if you know of many cases like this, but
yeah. The town, there's a few towns, especially in the east of Ramallah, like Tormasaya, Derdewan, Mazra Sharkiya. These cities are known for that. They even like in my city in the summer, the population goes up by double because people come and visit. These are mainly people who live in the West, and they come back and they build their houses, and usually they'll live in the country 3 to 6 months in the year. Sometimes they even send their children there to go to school. Like for us, for example, like our parents would make sure that we got some, education. Like even if you were like living in the United States, you would send your kids back to live, to basically have some attachment to the language and culture and stuff like that. So that's very common.
Yeah.
Altoids, I don't know if you want to respond to this, but Minoru wrote on YouTube, calling black people coloreds is kind of racist. Did you know that?
I didn't. Well, I think he's uninformed.
That's a specific.
But in South Africa, the colored people.
He was using the term that South Africa. He
wasn't
using it for him, but
it's a cultural
in
cultural
South Africa,
difference.
the color term means a person who is a mixed background. A person who's either like mixed from white and a European and local African or Indian or whatever. It's a colored person. He's using other languages too. In French is used
right.
Creole, for example.
I think we all view things through the lens in which the society of which we come. So in America, saying colored people is certainly has a racist connotation. But so I hope that clarifies, Minoru. What's interesting in America is colored people is racist, but people of color is not only perfectly acceptable. That's what is now being requested, that people of color are referred to. So that's interesting. And words, really a lot of words, and what makes them offensive is a historical connotation. So it's not completely random that if you just switch around how you say it, it's okay. It does make sense, but it is interesting and worth pointing out. So
yeah, for more what's his name, Mordor, like it's more like from the Lord of the Rings. I'm just making sure.
Oh no,
his name correctly.
Minoru.
Minoru, okay. So Minoru, just to finalize that, colored people in South Africa are the majority of the population in the Cape Town area and North Cape. It's like in the Cape area, the majority of the population is mixed. That's why you have a party like the Democratic Alliance, I think DA, which is the government of that area, of the Cape Town area. Why? Because the majority of the population there, who are white and color, they vote for the DA party, and I think it's the second biggest party in South Africa, probably.
Cool, thank you for.
And they were very well integrated in the apartheid system, like not exactly accepted, but they had better opportunities than the non-mixed population.
Cool. Well, we get a thanks understood from Minoru, so happy we got to settle that.
Something I'd like to add, because is that because you were mentioning about white South Africa worried about security, and I think Mark, if I understand correctly, one of the primary reasons why they were propping up the apartheid system for as long as they did was more economic. That there was a massive economic benefit in propping up the apartheid system due to exploitation of workers and stuff like that. And so, it wasn't just security. There was a financial incentive for the white minority to keep it up and to keep it going the way they had it.
Interesting. So thanks for adding that. And I imagine that, having that be your public rationale just is not nearly as compelling as security. So I think often there's probably more than one motivation, but we're gonna lean on the one that's the most compelling. And I think we do probably see something similar here in Israeli society, that security is very much the primary concern and the primary motivation. Like the reason why most Israelis will support policies that are oppressive towards Palestinians is not because they want to oppress Palestinians, but they believe that it's necessary for their security. But, there's no shortage of people who also want to continue to expand and take land just purely on ideological and religious grounds. And that's just not nearly as compelling to the international community. So that's not a justification that's often pushed, pushed to the front. So yeah, so thanks for that clarification. But if anyone's interested, there's a series of these conversations they filmed from the 50s for college students. They would bring people from all over the world and just have them engage in conversations. And I found them to be fascinating. Let me see if I could find one to drop it in the chat.
I've seen those videos, and I think you want to mention the South African guy who when he speaks against the other African students.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure that. I think there's two where they're South Africans, but the one I'm dropping is one of them. But yeah, you want to give more context on what you were saying?
So I think it was the United Nations or an organization in America who were bringing students from everywhere around the world. And one of the guys, it was actually, I know exactly what you mean. There was this guy from Africa. I don't remember which country from Africa. But a very smart guy. I think he eventually became a politician later on. Very smart student. Went to Africa, from Africa. And then a South African student also was there, a white South African. And they got into a discussion. They were asked on their opinions on the situation in South Africa and the apartheid and all the stuff. And I believe, if I remember correctly, the South African kid, he was defending the apartheid system, saying that is for various reasons, cultural, historical, and economic, whatever, political. It was even different reasons. And however, the African student, who I don't remember where it was, maybe you remember, Adler. He just grilled the guy, and everybody agreed with him.
I don't know if that is the one I saw. I think I saw the other one because I saw a South African. I believe it was a girl who was doing the justifying, But I think the one I sent.
Yeah, it probably was a girl.
But I think the one I sent is what you're describing. So maybe we could even set it up for a little Discord watch party for some of these. But they're fascinating.
Okay.
And the people they brought are so intelligent. It almost got me thinking. It's like, did they really pick the top quality from all these places to send them for this conversation, or is it something about, are we just deteriorating as a species because their like level of articulation and maturity for their age seems like something that's hard to find today? So it's
I just think they brought the smartest people from each country.
Yeah, perhaps, and just less microplastics destroying us from the inside out. But yeah,
I think we're definitely deteriorating.
Who said that?
It's Ahmed.
Oh, okay. You think we're deteriorating?
Yeah, I mean, I listen, for example, to interviews with people on the street in Egypt from the 50s and the 60s, and they all sound like they have PhDs. Just random people on the street. And
I think there's a misconception, though, with the whole thing. Because in the 50s, maybe 10, 20% of the population actually knew how to read and write. And usually were people with long histories of educated families. So these people selected these families were the best of the countries forever, like long legacies of academic families or whatever. And many of the time, these people were selected because they would not select the guy who doesn't know how to read and write. Obviously, they would select the guy who knows how to read and write.
You're saying even for the street interviews, you believe this to be true, or for the debates where we were talking about?
Well, even for the street interviews, because in the 50s, if you go to cities, in the 50s, the majority of the population who live in the cities, especially in what we now call the historical sections of the city, were people who were already educated or middle class or that worked for certain jobs. Live the cities not. You remember, most people used to live in the rural areas, and they didn't know how to read or write. They worked in farms. The people who live in the cities, they have some type of skill. The only reason why. In the 50s, that's when in many countries like Egypt, for example, we see the transition between the coming industrialization, etc.
Interesting.
But Egypt has one of the highest literacy rates in the region, if not the world.
When? In the 50s?
For the past century.
In the 50s?
Yes, in the 50s. Egypt used to send teachers to everywhere in the Arab world because they had such a high literacy rate.
I believe so. I wouldn't disagree with you, since I believe the British, when they controlled Egypt, they push a lot of reforms.
Well, you know what's surprising to many is that Palestinians have an exceptionally high literacy rate. In Gaza, it's something like 97%, which is actually, I believe, higher than Israel proper. I believe the reason for that, though, is I think Bedouins that live in Israel have a relatively low literacy rate. Then some of them are just like out, not in the same school system, so probably don't have the same access to education. But the fact that it's like 97% in Gaza is, I think, surprising to many people. I was surprised when I heard that.
Why would it be surprising?
Well, you think a society that is, living in what I think is fair to describe an open air prison, where every few years the lawn gets mowed and are run by a government that values resistance over peace. Like it's just not a recipe for a high literacy rate. Like there's just many factors at play, right? It seems like a fair. It's
that way. In Arab culture, literacy is a very high component within raising one's children.
Right. So it seems like these are all bad assumptions, right? It's bad assumptions that it should be low, but I think that's probably what caused my surprise. And you could also make the case that there's some Orientalism involved, that there's just this perception that Middle Eastern cultures don't have the same literacy rate as Europeans. I'm open to that argument as well. I think that might be at play to why people are surprised to discover this.
Adar, now you mentioned something interesting about Israeli literacy, and sometimes I see Israel, and then I see us in the diaspora, and I feel there's a big difference in our cultures, like in the Jewish diaspora and the Israeli Jewish culture. And you live in the diaspora. You know how we are. we what we value, what the stuff we want to do, what our kids want to do, and in Israel is a completely different thing. Like people don't think about, maybe they want to be something later on, but a lot of people think about the military. They want to do the rough stuff first. And like in the diaspora, we are completely different. We don't like the rough stuff. We want to do the most like you think to the academia, whatever. We do this and that. We want to make business. Forget about the military. People is like, okay, maybe the military is okay, but no, they don't really put this emphasis in diaspora culture as they do in Israel.
Mm.
And I think that has to do with Zionism itself, right? That they try to change the Jewish mentality from this mentality, how they call it, a weak mentality, into like the strong Jewish man or something.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never thought about that, but I think you're onto something.
I know a lot of people who think Israelis are like dumb because I don't know, or rough or whatever, like. And I personally have seen that there's a very big difference, even within the religious world. There's a big difference between religious Israelis and religious diaspora people.
Right.
Like in America, the Haredim and the very religious people, they love making business. They love making money. They work very hard. They make companies. They don't go out in the world like they usually make them very low key.
Yeah.
But we always done business. I don't know. And in Israel, it's complete opposite. They hate this. They hate participating in the economy. They don't want to do it. Many of them are not really into. Now, so here, even like if you join the military here, and the Haredim are okay if you join the military in America, for example.
Right.
There's no issue with that.
Well, I think a lot of these communities that you're describing have just been spoiled in the sense that they get government funding to just study Torah all day. So their culture has kind of evolved around that notion. Whereas American Haredi community, they're not going to just get the government paying for them to study Torah. So they put some of their wit and effort into business, and they do quite well there. Yeah. Interestingly, there's supposedly like a bank that's only for Hasidic Jews, that they have like two branches. One is in Mea Sharim, which is a community in Jerusalem that's like the most ultra Orthodox. Many people there, Yiddish is the primary language spoken. Many don't even speak it Hebrew. And then the second branch is in Brooklyn, and supposedly they still use they use like fax and landline for communication. And who knows, there might be some serious. I don't want to put conspiracies out there, but who knows what they're funneling back and forth. But yeah, it's fascinating. And then when there was the whole thing about the tunnels that were found under 770, that's the big Chabad yeshiva. Obviously people let their imaginations run wild, and you saw the prominent narrative online being, oh, it's for like child trafficking or whatever. Whereas I think the more plausible and given explanation is they weren't getting building permits. They just took it into their own hands and built tunnels, I think, for easier access to the mikveh, which is
it wasn't that.
Wasn't it the mikveh? They wanted access to the mikveh and they didn't get permits.
It's a bit more complicated. I actually have my rabbi is actually, his family is one of the leaders of Chabad.
Okay.
And he explained me exactly what happened. And he told me that what occurred there is that if you know Chabad, people think Chabad is like one organization. That's not true. It's like a range of organizations that come together and like they do different things, but you all come together with the same thought of the Rebbe, right? Like they have the same agenda, but different perspectives. Now, 770, specifically the building, is owned by the French organization within Chabad, like that everybody dislike. Not that they hate them, but they don't really like them per se as an organization, which is like the very extremist, the most extremist Rebbe Mashiach organization in America, is the one that controls 770. Now, next to 770, everything around it is owned by the main Chabad organization. Now, these two organizations dislike each other and or compete each other for popularity and whatever. and the main Chabad organization around did not let them build anything extra because they wanted to take over 770. So they started building under 770 because the Rebbe of Chabad, he wanted to expand 770, but because of the differences between the two organizations, they couldn't do it. So they did it anyways. And so the main Chabad organization called the police because they obviously didn't like what the organization that controls 770 was doing. And they barricaded there, and that's where the whole issue comes in.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So there we go. We got the inside scoop. Yep. So I see Minoru saying, but I want to go back to is the security concern of Israel, because the reason for violence that Palestinians always use is the occupation and lack of self-determination. Why not gamble for peace? And then continues and says, and also there is never a discussion about the security concerns for Palestinians. So to answer your first question, why not gamble for peace? I think most Israelis consider it to be a gamble that is too risky. So the average Israeli doesn't think there's a high likelihood that peace can be achieved, whether that's through one state or two states. They view them as both those solutions are likely to lead to disaster. So the cost, right? If you lose the gamble, the cost is quite great. If you win the gamble, cool, then you have peace on the land. That's a great reward. But if you think that the chances of disaster are 80%, are you going to take that risk? It's almost more comfortable to maintain the current status quo, which will come with waves of violence every so often, inevitably, but we're not taking a risk of massive disaster. Now, I don't think this is the right way to look at it. In fact, I argue that the status quo is the greatest risk because it leads to international isolation and it is certain to lead to more violence. So we see a very clear negative impact and risk we take with maintaining the status quo. And I think taking a gamble for peace is what we need to do. And sure, in fact, I think if we don't, that will be our demise here on this land. Or at the very least, if I don't want to be hyperbolic at all, I'd say it certainly increases the chance of our demise here on this land. So what we need is really to start talking about solutions that are easy to buy into and that give hope, and that, you know, Israel, as you will be convinced, is likely to succeed. And at the very least, if it fails, it's not an existential threat. And to your other question, there's never a discussion about the security concern for Palestinians. Yeah, I think that likely comes down to the fact that when we identify the primary concern for both sides, just by speaking to them, of course, Palestinians have a security concern, especially now where you have, you know, settler terrorism daily. So they definitely have it's a legitimate concern. But if you actually talk to them, like, they're primarily what drives them is justice. So, for example, if you could create a situation where Palestinians are fully secure, but yeah, they don't have access to, they still need to wait at checkpoints, and they don't have access to their to family members, and they don't have freedom of movement, that's not going to be enough, right? If justice is not given, then it's likely not a solution that's going to work. So I think a lot of it just comes down to identifying each group's primary concerns and working around that to build solutions. But of course, security will need to be taken into account for Palestinians, the same way many Jews still feel injustice. I would say primarily around their lack of access to our holiest site, which is Al-Aqsa, right? Temple Mount, where Al-Aqsa is built. But so even if, you know, some subset of the Israeli population feel a lack of justice, that's not the primary driver for Israelis. It's security. So I think that's probably where the distinction comes from. Let's see. I'm catching up in chat. So yeah, they're talking about the distinction between Haredim and Hasidim, and I did use them interchangeably. They often are, but not always. So, Altoids, do you kind of want to give a little explanation of the difference between Haredi and Hasidi?
Yeah, so I'm trying to discuss with Marty here in the chat about it. So every Hasidic is Haredim, but every Haredim is not Hasidic. The Hasidic thought is a movement, Ashkenazi movement that's more. It's like the Ashkenazi version of Kabbalah. Like it's a reaction to Kabbalah and mysticism and faith and all those things that the Sephardic world is very into since since a long time ago. I can't pinpoint a specific period. But it's the Ashkenazi version, because in the times Hasidism was established, the Ashkenazi world was very much more into halakha than the mysticism. So they created this school of thought to bring people call it to bring emotion to the religion, because it was emotionless, as some people will say. But anyways, every Hasidic can be or Haredim. And Haredim just means a person that's very religious. So you can be Ashkenazi, you can be Sephardic, you can be modern Orthodox, you can be religious, national Zionist, Dati Leumi. You can be non-Hasidic Ashkenazi, like the Litvish community or the Parashim, and there's many groups who can be Haredim in Israel, in America, but they doesn't mean they're Hasidic. The biggest Hasidic community in the world is Satmar. People think it's Chabad, but it's not Chabad. It's Satmar. I think they have around 200,000, maybe 300,000 by now.
They're actually rivals with Chabad in some sense.
Yeah, because Chabad is a bit more pro-military than Satmar, let's say.
Just to be clear, my only concern is that everybody get a job. That's all I'm saying.
Right. You say they should work. But interestingly, Altoids, I think in Israeli society, when they say Haredim, they're not referring to all religious people. It does seem like in Israeli society, Haredim is describing what you're saying is Hasidim. Like it's generally the settlers are not referred to as Haredim, neither are modern Orthodox. It's more so the Black Hatters, and maybe I would Black Hatters as well as the Sephardic version of that. Although I'm not sure. It almost seems like they're just referring to like the ultra Orthodox community, like what we know as the ultra Orthodox community.
The Yeshivish community.
Yeshivish,
including them.
And yeah, as well.
I suppose.
But Israelis do that with words sometimes. Like this is a random example, but here you say pargit in Hebrew means chicken thigh, but it's not. It's actually a Cornish hen, but they just use it to describe the thigh of a chicken instead of an actual Cornish hen, which is a different species. I know that's very random, but there's a lot of examples of that in Hebrew where they'll just take words and use them.
In modern Hebrew?
Yeah, in modern Hebrew, yeah.
It's really funny because we can have a conversation in Lashon HaKodesh, but I don't think I can have a conversation in modern Hebrew.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I think I need to work on that.
Okay.
It's very limiting, especially in the Sephardic world, because most people speak modern Hebrew nowadays.
Yeah. Well, there's I imagine there's a difference between biblical Hebrew and then like ancient Hebrew, or were these considered the same? Because we're talking about such a long timeline, right?
Yeah. Well, biblical, really, Lashon HaKodesh, I think people refers to everything from the Torah to the Tanakh to the Talmud.
Okay.
Even though if you read, for example, Daniel or the later prophets or the minor prophets, and then you read the Torah itself, the Hebrew is completely different. Like the structure of the words is very different. You have the later prophets in the Tanakh sounds more like Aramaic than it is early Hebrew. Early Hebrew sounds more close to Arabic than the later prophets in the Tanakh, for example.
Interesting.
It's interesting.
Interesting, yeah. There's an Israeli linguist by the name of Gilad Zuckerman. I actually had him on for a conversation years ago, and he wrote a controversial book called Israeli is a Beautiful Language. And he claims modern Hebrew, he doesn't even call it Hebrew. He says it's too different than ancient Hebrew. So he calls it Israeli. And he explains how a lot about the sentence structure is more European, because it was recreated by Europeans. I'm sure, he could obviously explain it better than I can, but he makes a pretty compelling case that it's quite a bit different. And then, modern Hebrew, I think, also took a lot of words from Arabic. There's a lot of Arabic words that we use, primarily the curse words.
Yeah.
Like we have close to no Hebrew curse words. They're all taken from Arabic.
There's none in the Lashon Kodesh.
There's none in Lashon Kodesh.
In the Torah? Yeah.
Well, then what's the etymology of like the term? And maybe we have Arabic speakers here, but like I guys, this is about to get rated. Let's give it a PG-13, right? It's not going to get that bad, but we use the term sharmuta, and I know that's Arabic. That means slut. Is that what it means in Arabic? Because that's how we use it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's the word zona, which we use as whore, but I don't think zona is Arabic. So where does zona come from?
Yeah, zona comes from the word to fornicate. So, and it's in Arabic, it's zina.
Okay.
So,
but that's the word zona is in the Torah. It's all over.
Yeah, but the thing is, the word itself.
The verb itself is called linzot. Okay, and it's so that's the verb. So when you say, when they say, for example, ben zoneh, it means a son of illegitimacy, like of fornication.
Yeah, correct. It's not in the Torah. The way they insult people, or the way there's something insulting, is by using a full sentence, as in they describe the action, but they don't have a specific word for it.
Okay, interesting. So zona actually initially it wasn't a pejorative. It became one in modern Hebrew. That's interesting. I'd be interested in seeing the development of that term. Okay, cool.
But yeah, so back to the Haredim situation and all stuff. I think it's interesting that in Israel they make this difference between Haredim and every other religious group, like every other team. But basically, Haredim, just for context, so people know, Haredim just means a person who trembles up to God, who is very scared, who fears God a lot. So they will take the laws and the rules and the religion very seriously.
Oh, interesting. That almost reminds me of, like, you hear Christians say, I'm a God-fearing Christian, and I imagine, does Islam have a similar concept to that?
Yeah, sort of. There's all kinds of ways to reference that.
Okay.
Like in Egypt, we say without or like a man who's of God. Or
okay, interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things with etymology and how I know we're getting into potentially controversial territory, but I guess that's what we do for a living in these parts, so let's do it. But even how certain parts of religion have changed over time based on like translation and interpretation. So like the way Mary is described, Mary, Jesus's mother, is described in Hebrew, she's referred to as an alma, which means maiden, but can often be used interchangeably with virgin, because maidens are generally virgins. But the word alma, which they used to describe Mary in the original text, is referring to her seemingly as a maiden, which again, I don't want to offend anybody, but
it's also used as a servant.
Alma. Oh, interesting. Okay, like a young female servant, though, probably specifically.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
For example, in the early Torah, because the one that they call that mentions her in the Tanakh is I think Isaiah. I think it's Isaiah. And the early Torah in the story of Exodus in Shemot, they mention another Alma. Alma is mentioned, I think, 3 times only in the Torah, 5 times in the entire Torah and Tanakh. And one of the other times that is mentioned is when the spouse, the spouse of Pharaoh, tells her Alma, her servant, to fetch her something. I don't remember what it was, to get her something. So it can be also used as a servant.
Interesting. Okay.
And if you see the part that they say, it's specifically saying the servant of God. In the part that they call Mary, is like the servant of God. Or in the case they want to use it, because Christians want to translate it that way, they say the maiden of God or the virgin of God in that case.
Interesting.
And there's a linguistic dispute there.
Right. Okay.
I heard a bit about that. Why in the book of Isaiah is translated as when the term Alma might be used. Why it's translated as virgin, and the story I heard, don't know how accurate it is that when the rabbis were originally translating the Torah into Greek or the Tanakh into Greek, we have 3 Hebrew words for a young woman. I think maybe Alma, Petula, which is virgin, and Isha. And in the Greek, they didn't have a word for a young woman. And so the rabbis translated it as virgin. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I've heard.
Interesting.
Yeah, the dispute comes from the Greek translation, is correct. And that's why it's very hard to accept it, because since it was translated into Greek, it doesn't exactly, and the Greek translation is not exactly accepted in the Talmud either, since it was very...
Yeah, had they used the word, had the Tanakh said Petula, then it would have been very clear, but it doesn't use that word. It uses it elsewhere in the Tanakh.
Yeah, we dispute the Greek translation. Nonetheless, we have, since the ancient times, they didn't like it. They didn't like the Hellenic Jews in general. And one of the pillars of the Hellenic Jews was translating the Torah into Greek, which made people very upset. Jews are always upset about people trying to change things.
Are you talking about the Septuagint?
Yes.
Bye, Minoru. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, I think Minoru wanted to keep talking about the security threat. I think we deviated a little bit.
Oh, it's all good. I'm sure there's people who would very much prefer this one. There's another interesting one in Hebrew, and a lot of it is not just translation, questions in translation. A lot of it is questions in interpretation, right? So it's forbidden by Jewish law to mix dairy and meat in food. But if you look at where that comes from, the Torah says, "Lo lavshel gdi b'chalev imo," which translates roughly to, "Don't cook meat in its mother's milk." But I've also heard people say that chalav and chalev, which has the same spelling, chalev is actually animal fat. So don't cook. Oh, and gdi is just a baby goat. It's not all meat. So they're saying don't cook a goat in its mother's fat or in its mother's milk, which is very different than saying don't eat milk and meat together. How that then came to be don't eat meat and milk and wait 3 hours between, I don't fully know, but that's another interesting...
You want me to explain?
What's that? Yeah. I had a feeling you'd have some info on this.
Well, I mean, this is one of the... Is this an interesting question? But it's being answered 2,000 years ago for us, thankfully. So the Mishnah, the rabbis in the Mishnah asked the same question that you asked in the year, I don't know, 90 maybe, or 650, year 30, something like that, some 2,000 years ago, or 1,995, I don't know, some number like that. Anyways, the rabbis discuss on what is the meaning of the things in the Torah, etc. But we understand that the Torah, many of the words in the Torah, as you know, are very confusing, since one thing can mean another if the nikud is placed differently, if the word is said differently. That's why we're very careful on how to translate, how to pronunciate the words in the Torah. We try to not change the meaning of one word to the other, and we try to keep it that way. And in the Talmud itself, in the Mishnah, the rabbis discuss whether or not milk and dairy is the thing that milk and meat. Sorry, yes, it is milk and meat because back in the day, in the times of the Mishnah, the second temple, they understood it as such based on the traditions. They always read it that way. They always said it that way. They knew back then that it was milk and meat, and we kept the tradition going. Now the time thing, that's tradition. I mean, you can technically nothing is stopping you from eating dairy and meat right after the other, or
just not on the same plate,
right before it. Correct.
Right.
Technically, nothing is stopping you, but then the rabbis later on, I think later on after the Talmud or during the Gemara period, around the year 700, 500, they thought that based on understanding of digestion and how long it takes to digest food, that technically you could mix both milk and meat in your stomach if it goes into your stomach and you still have meat in there,
right,
or dairy in there. Now they say that, but that we need to understand why, because in the kosher laws, what is constituted as mixing? Mixing is anything that transfers something. The essence of something has to be transferred, whether it is by fire, as in cooking something together that makes it into one thing, or by liquids. If you, let's say, have bread on the ground and then you drop milk on top of it, because milk is liquid, the milk will be transferred into the bread. It will be absorbed into the bread, and now the bread is dairy. Now you can have, let's say, a piece of cheese next to a piece of meat, a raw meat, and raw cheese or whatever, like normal piece, just a piece of cheese. You put them together. There's no transfer of anything. Therefore, you can still eat them separately again.
Interesting.
Now, if you were to put fire on top of that cheese and the cheese melts and goes into the meat, then yeah, it becomes not kosher.
Although
I heard that the archaeological findings, I think in Lebanon, found a pagan society where there were actually a written recipe in their temple for cooking a kid in its mother's milk. And because in the Torah we're constantly told not to be like pagans, this law was meant to be meant literally.
I heard that as well.
Yeah. So
are you talking about the Phoenicians?
It might be. It was years ago that I read about it.
It was.
I'd have to look it up.
Like, it seems like there's things in the Torah that the intention is to really differentiate ourselves from the other groups, which were primarily pagan, right. And this is one clear distinction. I've heard that as well.
I mean, the Torah said it itself. Right. For example, the laws on tattoos and the laws on not cutting the corner of your hair, the payot. Those laws specifically in the Torah says not be like a pagan.
Oh,
the pagans in the time, they will cut specifically the corner of their head of their heads, and the rabbis or the people at the time, they said, well, they're cutting the connection between their head and their body, because they don't want their head and their body to think together or something.
Right.
That was one of later investigations. Or with the whole tattoo situation. Tattoos are technically not illegal in Judaism. You could have tattoos technically, but because pagans at the time, they wore tattoos to pray to their gods or something, it was banned.
Interesting.
I thought the Torah was very clear about not having tattoos. You're saying that we're allowed to do so according to the Torah?
You're not allowed to have tattoos when you die.
Correct.
But having them when you're alive.
I thought Blackstone is 2 cents to everything. I'm realizing, even in Judaism, not just Zionism.
What?
He's a rabbi, Abdullah. He's an upcoming rabbi.
What? No, that's not true. But whatever.
But you're an observant Jew, right?
I am religious. Yes.
Religious. Okay. So just for more context, what you said about cutting the side of the head, it's essentially a haircut. Jewish law forbids you to shave above this bone here, like your upper cheekbone. And then some would interpret that it's not only are you not allowed to shave above it, but we're going to grow it out, right? That's essentially where it comes from, right, Altoids?
I mean, the growing out part is cultural.
Right.
Like,
you're just not meant to cut
really
above here.
Law.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can have a very short hair like yours and still be kosher.
Right, right. Now, in terms of the tattoos, what you said that you're not allowed to be buried with them.
Where does the haircut emerge from?
It was, well, as Altoids explained, it was a rejection of paganism where they would shave the sides of their heads. So this was like to differentiate ourselves with them.
Yeah, but what time frame?
Oh, what time frame? Altoids?
2,000 years ago?
A few thousand years ago.
How long?
Long? I mean, the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, I mean, 3,500 years ago.
So Altoid, if we were to go back to Jerusalem, like right before the second temple was destroyed, would we find people with those long braids?
I don't know if you will find people with long braids. I think that's a later development, but you will probably definitely find them with with their full hair there in that section.
Yeah, I think Pace is later. That's the Pace came later, but
I think
people wouldn't.
Came, yeah, I think it came from oppression in Turkey or somewhere around that area.
Oh,
or Turkey or the Byzantine Empire.
Interesting.
Somewhere in Anatolia. It happened in Anatolia.
About the tattoos, though. Oh yeah, go ahead, Justin.
I was gonna say, even though like when I studied Hebrew and stuff in Israeli schools that I did an Ulpan program through, it was very hard to study the religious community because the religious community, like even for most Israelis, you can't just approach them and ask them stuff because sometimes it's they're not as open. But there's an Israeli series that I thought was actually really good because it kind of went. I think it was called Shitzel, and it actually gave a big insight into the religious homes and stuff, like the inside how the family structures, the relationships between husband, wife, children. So, and interesting that I found that there was even like a misunderstanding even between secular Jews and them, just as much as there are with non-Jewish people in the country as well. I just thought that was interesting.
It's even further probably because at least Jews know a little bit of what's going on. But was your question about tattoos, Adam?
Oh, well, no, I just wanted to add something on that topic. I actually didn't know you can't have tattoos, but I did know you can't be buried with them because at least in Israel, and I think it's also like this abroad, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you have tattoos, so they'll actually cut them off.
Yes, they will close the skin off.
Yeah, they cut the skin, yeah, which is interesting. So, guys, I do need to hop off in a minute. I did see DSN. I'll respond to your questions real quick. And then, obviously, guys, feel free to keep this going. I'll just shut the live stream down. But DSN is saying, I guess we're back to Israel-Palestine. Do you think that the only alternatives for how the conflict could progress are, 1, a peace-based solution, or 2, increasingly unstable, violent, increasingly unstable, or violent status quo? Do you think the policy of the current Israeli government is a policy of status quo maintenance? So I would say those are probably the two options. And, in those, peace-based solution or increasingly unstable or status quo, that involves a lot of many different scenarios, right? That's not just two things, but call them two categories of things that may happen. And so I would agree with that. In terms of the current Israeli government, yeah, for decades now, maintaining the status quo has been the policy. I think after October 7th, it put Netanyahu in a situation where his legacy is potentially destroyed, and so is his reign to power. So for him to preserve his legacy and maintain his power, he will try to change the status quo in a way that's better. So October 7th pulled Netanyahu out of the mindset that I will just continue to maintain it. And now I think he's actively trying to change it. The way he's trying to change it seems to be relocation of Gazans and long-term control over Gaza. Hope that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And any follow-up on that, or we could still chat more later if you'd like. But I do need to start getting ready for Independence Day stuff.
Yeah, we should have a meeting tomorrow, right? I just wanted to chat about that without the stream, if that's possible.
Yeah, we could have a conversation offline, no problem at all. What else here? Okay, what do we have else coming up this week? Nothing coming to mind. We'll keep you updated on the tour. We're gonna go see the Samaritans sometime in the next few days. And to all the new community members here, welcome. I'm seeing a lot of new people, so it's good to have you all. Also,
Adar.
Yeah.
For the Samaritans, can you ask them why they accept marrying Ukrainian Jewish woman?
Yeah, I already got the answer to that. They're having a population issue, so they're being a little bit more lax in letting in non-Samaritans. I guess they like Jews and Druze are also an ethno-religious group. I never thought about that. So there's 3 ethno-religious groups right here on the land, and there's not many in the world, so that's interesting. But if that's not a sufficient answer,
okay, you ask them the theological justification. I'm interested.
Okay, it's probably something similar to pikuach nefesh, that it's an existential, something existential. So there's some flexibility there. Also, who do we hear? Also, Shadow Disc. I don't think we've ever interacted, but without putting you on the spot, I wanted to actually compliment you. We were tuning in and out on the trip yesterday, and I caught your interaction with Rabbi Uri, and I thought you did an excellent job trying to test his beliefs, and you did it with good question asking. So I just wanted to give you that public acknowledgement. He didn't entertain. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I appreciate that. I didn't know what the right question to ask him was that wouldn't be confusing and would actually try to get to the root of what I was talking about. I think a lot of people like him, so I was wondering if you could sort of simulate him in your mind and ask the following 2 questions, which I sort of really wanted to ask him before he left. One, this land that he thinks God gave to him, what does he think are the borders of that? And if it turned out that land was different from Israel, like let's say it was Jordan or something else, would that be enough for him to pack up and leave and say, this isn't my home, I'm going to go somewhere else now? And if there's another country there, well, let's go for round 2.
So that's a good question. I think that a lot of like Zionist thought does not go as deep as these questions. I think many Israelis would need to think about it, and they might be challenged by it. But my sense is you do have some of the more nationalist Israelis are saying we do have claims to land outside of Israel, this including the West Bank, that is part of historic Israel, whether that's southern Lebanon and parts of Jordan. There are Israelis that say that. This is, I will say, this is a small fringe, and even if there's a larger segment of the population that believe it, there's no real political will to achieve this. Like the conspiracy that we're trying to achieve greater Israel, there's no real basis to that. But you will find Jews here that would say it is justified for us to go beyond the borders of Israel because it is our historic homeland. In fact, I had in my one-on-one interview with Rudy Rochman years ago, I pushed him on this point because and you can watch it, it's on the channel, just type I think Rudy and you'll find a few of our discussions, but this was like an in-person conversation, and he said he thinks we have right to sovereignty over all of our historic homeland. So I said, okay, even Jordan? And he said, I think so. I think there's a strong case to be made. And Rudy's not a fanatic like like many others. But even he acknowledged that he believed that. In terms of what is the land we believe is ours, I think for the most part, it's just what is available. So we don't see Jordan or southern Lebanon as available. So it's like, okay, all the land from the river to the sea, that's ours. We're just going to take that. And I think, that's also happens to be the same outline of what many view to be Palestine, right? Historic Palestine doesn't have clearly defined borders, but if you ask Palestinians today, what is Palestine? It happens to be the same exact outline of what many Israelis view Israel, minus the Golan Heights, which most Palestinians will say is Syria. But I think on both sides, we define our borders based on what is just contested and available.
Yeah, Dar, there's another big misconception in the Middle East about the flag of Israel. That why does it have the Star of David and then 2 blue lines? And many have said that this represents from the Nile to the Euphrates. And many, I know that it represents the the shawl that Jews wear that has the 2 blue lines on it.
Right. Yep.
And this is something that's really believed in, and I think I believed it most of my life, to be honest with you. That's where the symbolism came from. So it's interesting. So it's like when you have these symbolism that says, look, a Star of David and 2 blue lines. Obviously, these are 2 rivers, and then the whole the greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates. Right. So that's one of the.
Yeah. So I've heard that, and another interpretation is that it's just from the Mediterranean to the Jordan. Some would say that, but I think what you explained about the tzitzit, right? That's you may have noticed that. Wait, isn't it? It's not, but the tzitzit also has the blue.
Yes.
Yeah. So
the flag is really about talit, I think.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So just a little clarity. Maybe Altoid, do you want to explain the difference between tzitzit and talit and the symbolism of the blue, which initially came from snails, I believe?
Yes, from a snail.
Probably not from a snail. Probably from a plant, which the Talmud says is the exact same color and was prevalent in the Sinai at that time. They didn't have access to snail.
The Rambam argues that is a snail, and everybody accepts the Rambam position.
Yeah, well, not everybody. Karaites don't accept it.
Okay, interesting.
Karaites are not Jewish according to the Talmud anyway, so whatever.
Yeah, according to the Talmud, right?
But anyway, so the talit gadol, it has lines in it to represent the lack of blue. It has black lines. The Ashkenazi one has black lines. The Sephardic one doesn't have any lines. But since it has black lines to represent the lack of blue, since we don't know what exact blue it was, because we believe it's very likely that the snail that was used for the blue is probably extinct by now. So we don't have the blue anymore. So they use the black lines to represent it. Now, the flag of Israel, I suppose they decided to pick that blue in reference to returning to what was extinct. I don't know exactly why they tried, what's the meaning behind it, but the lines are supposed to represent the talit. And the blue is supposed to represent, I suppose, the rejuvenation of the Jewish people.
Is it blue to the Nile to the Euphrates? The 2 lines?
No, so that's what we're explaining. It's not. It comes from the talit and the tzitzit that has a blue.
Well, the tzitzit is something we wear. I know you ever seen Jews with a very long
strings coming out of their.
Hold on. Yeah.
They have these strings, yeah.
White strings.
It's discussed in the Talmud in Bava Kama, if I'm pronouncing it right, page 101. And it says there that indigo, the plant, is the exact same color that you would get from the snail, that you cannot tell the difference between the two. It doesn't make sense that God would tell us to use an unkosher animal and kill an animal just for the sake of getting its blood, which is that color blue. Rather than using a plant which was readily available in the Sinai at that time.
It's a compelling argument that God wouldn't ask us to use a non-kosher animal for it. But the thing is, the non-kosher animal, in this case the snail, we're not using it. We're not dressing with the snail. We're dressing with the color that comes out of the snail. Therefore, it's allowed.
Right.
Yeah,
it's the same color as indigo, which matches the color of the sky. It's supposed to represent the Shemayim, the blue sky.
I would say what is quite likely is that dependent on the Jewish community and what they had access to, there were probably different means to achieve that blue color. So if you lived in a place where you had access to a lot of these blue plants, you would use the plant, and others would use the snail. Maybe the snail was less accessible, so it was like a costlier version of that. Maybe one such example would be, you have like the Hasidim, that some of them wear the fur hat, and that doesn't come from a religious place, but some of it will actually be real mink and it'll cost like 10 grand, and others will have just like a lower cost version. So maybe it's also just what one would be a more expensive version. Maybe it's connected to what they had access to. I think it's likely that both these theories are true. What's that?
What's the significance of that hat, the mink hat?
So I'm gonna leave that to Altoids. I do need to hop off, so we are gonna end the stream. So to those watching on YouTube, thanks for tuning in. If you want to join the conversation, there's a link in the description. And for those in the community, enjoy. We will catch up soon.